Dante Hayes stood in the courtroom, not as a soldier, but as a suspect. The once proud Navy SEAL sniper, who had served with honor in missions the public would never hear about, now wore a wrinkled suit and chains around his wrists. The clinking of the cuffs echoed louder than any gavel strike. Around him, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some recognized his name from the news, others whispered half-truths and speculation. "Didn't he get a medal for something?" one voice asked. "No, he punched a cop," another replied, louder, harsher. The truth sat unspoken between them all. Dante didn't look up. Not because he was guilty, but because he was tired. Tired of fighting battles no one understood, of being praised in one breath and judged in the next. The courtroom didn't see the years he'd spent overseas, the lives he'd saved, or the demons he'd carried home. All they saw was a headline, "Veteran Assaults Officer." No one mentioned the homeless man he defended. No one asked why he stepped in. This trial wasn't about justice, it was about perception. A silent reckoning for a man who had once risked everything for a flag, and now stood alone beneath it. Not a single person in that room knew the full story, and worse, they didn't care to. The judgment had already been passed, not by a jury, but by a society quick to forget its heroes once they're out of uniform. Dante stood tall, but inside, he was crumbling, not from guilt, but from the weight of being unheard. The war hadn't broken him. This silence had. And in that silence, the world continued spinning, blind to the truth that sometimes, the greatest sacrifices happen after the battlefield. Amid the sterile cold of the courtroom, Dante's eyes drifted, not to the judge, nor the accusing stares, but back to the choking dust of a street in Syria. The memory hit like a silent explosion. Smoke curled through the air, gunfire echoed in the distance, and rubble trembled under his boots. Civilians scattered like shadows. Then, he saw her, a little girl, maybe 6, blood on her arm, trapped between a collapsed wall and the open line of fire. The radio in his ear screamed, "Hold position." But his legs moved before thought could stop them. He sprinted. Bullets cracked past. He dove, shielded her small body with his own, and crawled back through the dust and death. Alive. He didn't regret it. Not even when the reprimand came. Not when they called it insubordination. Not when his commendation ceremony was quietly cancelled. He'd made peace with that. But now they were calling him reckless, volatile. A threat. The courtroom didn't know the child's name. Didn't care she was alive because of him. All they saw was a man who had once chosen a human life over a military command. To them, that was weakness. To Dante, it was the only time he'd truly done something right. He disobeyed protocol, they said, reading cold reports and ticking boxes. He saved a life, his heart whispered back, louder than any verdict could drown. He blinked back to the courtroom. The dust was gone, but the weight of that day still pressed on his shoulders. Not as a regret, but as a truth no one else seemed to see. And in a world hungry for punishment, compassion had made him the villain. Back in the courtroom, the officer stood with polished boots and practiced words. He became aggressive, refused to follow orders, threatened me, he said, voice flat but firm. The jury listened, their faces still. The audience, already swayed by the cuffs on Dante's wrists, nodded quietly, as if the words confirmed what they wanted to believe. Dante didn't flinch. He remembered the night exactly. A gas station at the edge of downtown. Cold. Quiet. A homeless veteran stood outside, tattered coat barely clinging to his shoulders, asking for a coffee. When the shouting started, Dante stepped in, not with fists, but with presence. Calm. But authority saw a threat, not a protector. The officer shoved the old man. Dante moved to shield him. Words flew. Then fists. But not Dante's. He took the hit. Didn't strike back. Didn't run. But in the report, there was no mention of the old vet. No context. Just resisted. Just hostile. The truth got buried beneath the weight of a badge and the silence of the night. Now, in this courtroom, that single moment was painted as a violent outburst. And no one questioned it. No one asked why a war hero would suddenly turn dangerous. They didn't see the years of discipline. The self-control forged in combat. The life risked for strangers, again and again. To them, he was just another headline. Another case. But to Dante, this was his entire life being erased by one misunderstanding and a society too impatient to ask why. Every act of valor Dante made now looks like defiance to people who never wore a uniform or saw a battlefield. And so, the silence deepened, louder than the officer's words, and more painful than the punch he took for a man no one remembered. The courtroom doors creaked open, slow and deliberate. Conversation ceased. Even the judge paused mid-sentence. Every head turned. Click. 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 Measured footsteps echoed on the polished floor as a man in full dress blues entered, a living monument in medals and discipline. Silver hair, a firm jaw, and 4 shining stars on each shoulder, General William Lancaster. A name spoken with reverence in military circles. A legend. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't need it. He walked past rows of stunned spectators, past the officer who had testified, past the jury, until he stood beside Dante Hayes. The judge blinked, startled. General Lancaster. The general raised a hand gently, then looked straight ahead. His voice was low but carried like thunder. "Your Honor," he said, "that man there saved my son's life. Twice. In 2 different countries. Once when he was bleeding out in a firefight in Kandahar. Again when he dragged him to safety after an ambush in Mosul. 2 lives taken from the edge of death. Not just a soldier. A brother." He turned slowly to face the courtroom. "I've pinned medals on his chest myself. I've seen him lead men through fire and loss. But what matters most is what he did when no one was watching, risking his career to save a child, shielding a homeless man with nothing to gain. That isn't weakness. That's the kind of courage this country was built on." He stepped closer to the judge. "I owe him more than medals, I owe him my family. And this nation owes him our respect." A hush swept the courtroom. The weight of his words settled like a new kind of truth, one too powerful to ignore, too human to dismiss. And for the first time, eyes turned toward Dante with something other than judgment. The judge sat in still silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on Dante as if seeing him, truly seeing him. For the first time. The courtroom remained hushed, no movement, no noise. Even the air felt reverent. Then slowly, the judge stood. A long breath left his lips as he looked at the decorated general beside the shackled man. He didn't speak a single word of judgment, only turned to the bailiff and gave a quiet, resolute nod. The click of the cuffs being unlocked was louder than anything said that day. Dante flexed his wrists, not in defiance, but as if reminding himself he could still move freely, that he was still human beneath the weight of the world's assumptions. The room remained still. Eyes wide, some wet with emotion. A reporter in the back, unnoticed until now, lowered her phone, whispering to herself, "People need to hear this." And they did. Weeks later, the video hit every corner of the internet. Not just the footage of the courtroom, but the story, the child in Syria, the homeless vet, the son of a general. The courage it took not just to fight wars, but to show compassion when it cost everything. The headline read, "The hero America almost forgot." But Dante didn't need the headlines. He didn't want the praise. He only wanted the truth to matter again. Not because of rank. But because someone finally told the truth. And in that truth, the weight began to lift, not just from Dante, but from a world aching to believe that decency still has a voice, and that honor doesn't vanish when the uniform comes off. Sometimes justice doesn't come with a gavel. Sometimes it walks in full dress blues, and says what everyone else is too afraid to. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, the story of Dante Hayes reminds us that true heroism often lies not in grand displays of power, but in quiet acts of compassion, especially when they come at a cost. He was a man forged in battle, but nearly broken by silence, forgotten by the very people he once risked everything to protect. Yet in the end, it wasn't rank, medals, or headlines that redeemed him, it was the truth, spoken aloud by someone who had the courage to stand beside him. This is more than a courtroom drama. It's a story about humanity, about how easily we turn our backs on those who no longer fit the mold of our expectations. It's about the price of integrity, and the quiet strength it takes to choose kindness over protocol. And most of all, it's a reminder that justice isn't just about laws, it's about listening, understanding, and having the heart to see beyond the surface. Dante's story leaves us with hope, that even in a fractured world, truth can still rise, compassion can still win, and one voice can still change everything.